John had always been fascinated by old things. The smell of aged paper, the feel of worn leather, the faint scratch of a well-used wooden table. These little details had a way of capturing his imagination like nothing else. That Saturday morning, he found himself driving down a winding country road, the trees shedding golden leaves that fluttered across the asphalt, like tiny dancers. He was headed to an auction that had been advertised in the local paper, a small, rural event, but one rumored to have rare antiques and items with stories that went back decades. The countryside was quiet, except for the soft hum of his car engine and the occasional crow overhead. John had been to auctions before, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the rumor about a mysterious collection being sold, or maybe it was just the excitement that came from the thrill of discovery. He parked his car in the dirt lot outside a long, low building that looked more like a barn than an auction house. The building had wide double doors, and from inside came the sound of laughter, shuffling feet, and the occasional clang of metal. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by a cacophony of sounds. People were talking loudly, negotiating prices, and pointing at items spread across tables. The room smelled of polished wood, leather, and a faint hint of dust. He adjusted the strap of his bag, which contained his notebook and a few small tools he always carried to examine antiques closely. His eyes scanned the tables quickly. There were old clocks, delicate porcelain figurines, stacks of books with cracked spines, and cabinets filled with silverware that had lost its shine but not its charm. John moved slowly, deliberately, wanting to take everything in. He loved watching people at auctions, the way their eyes lit up at a rare find. The subtle nods and whispers as they tried to negotiate unseen deals, and the occasional burst of laughter when someone made a surprising discovery. But amidst all this, one person caught his attention immediately. She was behind a small wooden table near the back of the hall, methodically checking items and marking them down in a notebook. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a simple sweater and jeans. What struck John wasn't just her concentration, but the way she seemed calm in the midst of the chaos, almost like she belonged to a different, quieter world. She was carrying a large, heavy-looking burlap sack. It wasn't like the other items being handled. There was a weight to it, both physically and in the way people glanced at it curiously. She set it down gently on the table and began organizing the contents nearby, carefully folding and stacking them. John watched, fascinated. He had seen many auctions in his life, but rarely had he seen someone handle something with such care and attention. There was an air of mystery about her, and about the sack that made John feel a strange mix of curiosity and anticipation. He wandered closer under the pretense of browsing other tables. Each step seemed to draw him deeper into a story he hadn't yet understood. Around him, the auction continued at its usual pace. A man with a bushy mustache argued playfully with a woman over an old clock. Children whispered and pointed at colorful glass bottles on a shelf. But John's attention kept returning to the woman and her sack. She moved with deliberate grace, untangling cords and adjusting the sack as if she were preparing for something important. The auctioneer stepped up onto a small raised platform and clapped his hands to gather attention. His voice boomed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have something very special today. Keep your eyes open and your paddles ready. You never know what might come your way." The crowd stirred with excitement. John felt a small thrill run down his spine. He could feel the tension and anticipation in the room, a feeling that something rare was about to be revealed. John circled the hall a few more times, pretending to study the items on the tables. He examined an old globe, tracing the faded countries with his finger. He held a silver pocket watch up to the light, studying the intricate design on its back. But nothing distracted him from the mysterious sack. Every now and then, she would lift it slightly, shake it gently, or glance at it with an expression that was both careful and anxious. It seemed to hold more than just objects. It held secrets, history, perhaps even a story that wanted to be told. Curiosity got the better of him. He leaned slightly closer, pretending to adjust his bag, while sneaking glances at the sack. From this distance, he could see that the contents weren't random. There were bundles tied with string, papers that looked old and worn, and something small and wooden that reflected the sunlight streaming through the windows. His heartbeat quickened. He had spent years hunting for rare artifacts, items with history, items that carried a personal story. And now, here was something that seemed to whisper to him across the room, beckoning him closer. People around him were getting louder. The auctioneer was moving from one table to another, raising paddles and calling out numbers. John felt a strange sense of patience wash over him. He didn't need to rush. He wanted to see her reveal the sack himself. There was an almost magnetic pull drawing him forward. The crowd started to notice the sack too, murmuring quietly among themselves. Some were curious, some skeptical, and a few clearly excited at the possibility of discovering something extraordinary. John stood quietly, letting the anticipation build. As minutes passed, the woman slowly began to untie the burlap sack. Every movement was deliberate, careful, almost reverent. John held his breath, feeling the room's energy change. The casual chatter softened, replaced by a collective hush. People instinctively knew that something important was about to happen. The woman lifted the top of the sack slightly, letting the crowd see a glimpse of what lay inside. Papers, small boxes, and bundles of objects began to spill out in a careful cascade. The mystery that had drawn John here was finally being revealed. John's mind raced with possibilities. He wondered who the items belonged to, where they had come from, and why they were hidden in such a simple sack. He felt a strange connection to the woman, even though he had never met her before. There was something about her calm determination and careful hands that reminded him of his own love for history and artifacts. He had spent years searching for treasures, but rarely had he felt the anticipation of discovering something truly meaningful like this. The crowd leaned in, whispering among themselves. People tried to guess the contents, speculating about their origin, value, and significance. John stayed at the edge, feeling both excitement and patience. He didn't want to miss a single moment of what was about to unfold. There was a quiet tension in the air, a feeling that the moment had been waiting for, ready to unfold like the pages of a long-lost diary. And then, slowly, the woman began to lift the contents from the sack more deliberately. The shape of a small box caught John's attention. It was carved from wood, with intricate designs etched into its surface. He couldn't see clearly yet, but there was something familiar about it, a sense of recognition that stirred memories long buried. He felt an inexplicable pull, a mixture of curiosity and hope. John realized that this was why he had come to the auction today. Not for the ordinary antiques, not for the chatter or the thrill of bidding, but for this moment, the uncovering of a story that had been hidden away, waiting for someone to notice it. He felt his pulse quicken, and a warmth spread through him. He had come seeking treasures, but he might have stumbled upon something far more personal, something that touched not just history, but life itself. He stood there, watching as she carefully arranged the contents of the sack on the table. Every detail, every movement, seemed deliberate. John felt as if time had slowed down, letting him take in every sound, every scent, every subtle expression on her face. The world outside the auction hall, the roads, the cars, the endless chatter of daily life seemed to fade away. Here, in this small hall filled with strangers, he was on the verge of discovering a story that was far bigger than any object. John's curiosity mixed with a sense of anticipation he had rarely felt before. He had always loved objects for what they were. But now he realized that stories were just as important, maybe even more so. And in that quiet, crowded hall, with the soft rustle of paper and the faint creak of wooden tables, John felt that he was about to witness a story unfold that would change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. John could feel his pulse quicken, as he watched her carefully move the items from the sack. The crowd's curiosity was tangible, almost like a soft current pulling everyone toward the table. Some people whispered to each other, casting furtive glances at the objects she had laid out, while others simply stared, holding their paddles mid-air in anticipation. But John was focused on nothing else. He studied her movements, the gentle way she picked up each bundle, examined it, and set it down with the care of someone who knew the importance of every single piece. She seemed almost unaware of the growing attention around her. The concentration on her face reminded John of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment. Every paper she unfolded, every small box she opened, was treated as if it were precious, delicate, and full of meaning. The crowd murmured quietly among themselves, speculating about what might be inside the burlap sack. Some guessed coins, others jewelry, and a few thought they might be rare books or documents. But John had a feeling that none of these guesses would come close to the truth. The woman, whose name John had learned was Clara from a small name tag pinned to her sweater, reached for a stack of letters tied with string. The paper was yellowed and brittle, clearly very old. As she untied one bundle, the familiar scent of aged paper filled the air. Something John had always found comforting, almost like a bridge connecting the present with the past. He leaned in slightly, trying to see the handwriting on the top sheet. The letters were penned in a careful, looping script, the kind that had become rare over the decades. John's imagination began to run wild, picturing the stories these letters could hold. Confessions, secret plans, personal reflections, or perhaps even long-lost family histories. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she lifted the next item, a small, carved wooden box with intricate designs on its surface. Even from where he stood, John could see the fine details etched into the wood. There were patterns he had seen in old family heirlooms, symbols that carried meaning beyond simple decoration. He felt a strange pull toward the box, as if it were calling to him. His mind raced with possibilities, wondering who had crafted it, why it had been kept hidden, and how it had ended up in this modest auction hall. Around him, the crowd was growing more animated. People were whispering, pointing, and craning their necks to get a better view. A few began taking out phones, snapping pictures of the objects. John stayed still, though, wanting to experience everything in real time without any distractions. He had always believed that objects were more than just items. They were vessels for stories, memories, and history. And now, with every movement Clara made, he felt like he was witnessing history unfold before him. He noticed that some of the letters were addressed to people with familiar surnames, names that sparked recognition in his mind. John's pulse quickened as he realized there might be a connection to his own family. Could it be possible that these items had once belonged to someone he knew? The thought made him both anxious and excited. He wanted to ask questions, but something told him to wait, to observe, and let the story reveal itself naturally. Patience, he reminded himself, was often the key to discovering the true value of such treasures. Clara lifted another bundle from the sack. This one was smaller, wrapped carefully in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing what looked like an old diary. Its leather cover was worn, the corners frayed from years of handling. John felt his heart skip a beat. Diaries were the closest thing to time travel he had ever found. They contained private thoughts, fears, hopes, and dreams. They were windows into lives long gone, yet still alive through the words written on the pages. He could see Clara's expression soften as she carefully opened the diary. Her eyes scanned the pages, her lips slightly parted, as if she were speaking to the words silently. She didn't just handle the diary, she interacted with it. John realized that she must have known something about these items, something that required respect and caution. Whoever had gathered these objects had not done so carelessly. They had preserved them, protected them, and now, Through Clara, they were being brought into the light once again. The auctioneer, sensing the crowd's growing excitement, raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, these items are unusual, perhaps even one of a kind. I encourage you to observe carefully, but remember some treasures are priceless, not just in money, but in meaning." His words carried weight, and John could see that they resonated with more than a few people. Yet he felt, deep down, that the monetary value was secondary. What mattered was the story behind each item, the history that had traveled through time and circumstance to reach this haul. John noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Clara and the auctioneer. They seemed to have an understanding, a silent agreement about how the items should be presented. This wasn't just about selling objects, it was about preserving their significance, making sure they were appreciated for their true worth. He admired the care and respect with which she worked, and he found himself wondering what it must have taken to gather these objects, keep them safe, and finally bring them here. As she continued to reveal the contents of the sack, John's attention was drawn again to the small wooden box. It seemed to hold more importance than the letters or the diary. He couldn't explain why, but something in its design, its careful preservation, and its deliberate placement on the table made him feel as if it were waiting for him. He felt a strange mixture of anticipation and reverence, as though the box carried a message meant just for him. Around him, the whispers of the crowd grew louder. People speculated about the origins of the objects, sharing theories and stories. But John remained quiet, fully absorbed in observing Clara. Her movements were precise and deliberate, each one telling him more about her dedication and respect for the items she handled. She seemed almost like a bridge between the past and the present, carefully guiding history into the hands of those who would understand and appreciate it. He noticed how carefully she handled the smallest details. When lifting the letters, she never bent them. When touching the diary, she avoided smudging the ink. Even the wooden box was handled with extreme care, as if one wrong movement could disrupt the story it carried. John realized that her care was not just professional, it was personal. She was invested in these items, connected to them in a way that transcended ordinary duty. John's imagination ran wild. He pictured the lives of those who had written the letters, kept the diary, and owned the wooden box. What had they experienced? What dreams and fears had they held? And how had these items survived the passage of time, moving from one hand to another, until they finally reached this auction hall? The thought filled him with a profound sense of wonder. History, he realized, was not just found in books or museums. It lived in objects, in stories, and in people who cared enough to preserve them. As Clara lifted yet another bundle from the sack, John caught sight of something unexpected. A small, folded piece of paper peeked out from under a stack of letters. He felt an almost magnetic pull toward it, as if it contained an important secret. She carefully unfolded it, and John leaned forward slightly to see what it might be. The paper was fragile. The ink faded, but the handwriting was elegant and precise. Even without reading it fully, John could sense the importance of the message it carried. The crowd murmured in anticipation, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. John's heart raced. He had been to many auctions, seen countless rare items, but he had never felt this level of personal connection. This sense that history was unfolding directly before his eyes. He realized that the true value of these items wasn't in their rarity or potential resale. It was in their story, their journey, and the way they connected people across generations. Clara finally paused, taking a deep breath as she surveyed the contents she had laid out. The crowd leaned in, eager to see the next step, but she seemed to take her time, ensuring everything was in order. John admired her patience. He knew from experience that rushing moments like this could diminish their significance. History deserved to be treated carefully, with attention, respect, and a willingness to listen to what it had to say. John felt a strange sense of anticipation mixed with calm. He had a feeling that whatever was about to happen next would be important not just for him, but for the entire room. The burlap sack, once ordinary in appearance, had transformed into a vessel of history, mystery, and emotion. Every item Clara revealed seemed to carry a piece of a story waiting to be completed. And John, standing quietly among the crowd, felt that he was on the verge of becoming part of that story himself. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself to wonder who the original owners of these items had been. What had their lives been like? Etched. What had their lives been like? What circumstances had caused these objects to be hidden, preserved, and finally returned to the world? He didn't know the answers, but he felt certain that the revelation would be meaningful, personal, and unforgettable. As Clara reached for the wooden box again, John felt a sudden surge of emotion. He didn't know why, but something about it felt deeply familiar. He tried to recall where he might have seen similar carvings, similar patterns, or similar shapes in his own life. The memory teased at the edges of his mind, just out of reach. He realized he was holding his breath, completely absorbed in the moment, waiting for the story behind the sack to reveal itself fully. And then, finally, she lifted the box higher, letting the crowd get a clear view. The room fell silent, as if everyone instinctively knew that the moment had arrived, the moment when mystery would meet revelation, and history would reveal its secrets to those patient enough to witness it. John felt a lump rise in his throat. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of hope, recognition, and awe. He had no idea what exactly lay within the box, but he knew that this was the turning point. The moment when everything he had been waiting for was about to be revealed. The small wooden box rested on the table, its carved patterns glinting faintly under the soft light of the auction hall. John could hardly believe his eyes. Something about the box seemed familiar, though he could not immediately place why. His chest tightened, a mix of anticipation and nervous excitement coursing through him. He had seen many rare objects in his life, but none had ever stirred him like this one. The crowd had fallen into a quiet hush, sensing that the moment had shifted from ordinary curiosity to something extraordinary. Clara's hands hovered over the box for a moment. She glanced around the room, her calm, deliberate demeanor contrasting with the growing excitement of the onlookers. Then, with a careful motion, she lifted the lid. A soft creak echoed through the hall. John leaned forward instinctively, his eyes locked on the contents. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a collection of items that seemed to shimmer with the weight of history. Delicate letters, a small locket, and a bundle of photographs, each one carefully preserved. But it was one particular object that made John's heart nearly stop. It was a small, intricately carved medallion, the surface worn smooth by age and handling, yet the design was unmistakable. John's mind raced as recognition struck him like a bolt of lightning. He knew this medallion. It had been in his family for generations, passed down from his grandfather, who had told stories about it for as long as John could remember. But it had disappeared decades ago under mysterious circumstances, lost in a family estate dispute that had never been resolved. The thought that it had somehow survived all these years, hidden away, and was now here in front of him, made him feel as though time itself had folded around him. The crowd murmured in curiosity, but John barely noticed. He was frozen in a mixture of shock and awe, his mind replaying memories of his grandfather's stories. He remembered sitting by the fireplace as a child, listening to tales of his grandfather's adventures, the people he had met, and the treasures he had collected. Among all the stories, the one about this medallion had always stood out. It was said to symbolize loyalty, courage, and family legacy. It was more than just an object, it was a piece of history, a symbol of everything John's grandfather had valued. Clara carefully lifted the medallion from the box and held it up for the crowd to see. John's knees felt weak, and he instinctively sank down slightly, as though the sight had physically struck him. He could feel the years of longing and unanswered questions finally converge into this single moment. The medallion had survived, hidden in a burlap sack, waiting for the right person to reclaim it. And now, by chance or fate, it was in his presence once again. The letters and photographs surrounding the medallion added to the story. John picked up one of the letters with trembling hands, careful not to disturb the fragile paper. The handwriting was old-fashioned, precise, and elegant, and he immediately recognized the familiar script of his grandfather's friend, a man who had been part of the family estate years ago. The letter described events John had only heard in passing, details about the medallion's journey, and the challenges faced in keeping it safe. Each word seemed to bring the past alive, connecting him directly to the lives and decisions of those who had come before. The photographs told stories too. There were images of people John had never met, yet somehow recognized from stories he had been told as a child. Each photo seemed to hold a memory frozen in time, a glimpse into moments that had been preserved not just in paper, but in the very essence of family history. John felt a strange, almost spiritual connection to them. It was as if he was seeing fragments of his own life reflected in a past he had never truly known, but had always felt tied to. Clara watched him for a moment, her eyes calm but attentive. She had clearly noticed his reaction, and seemed to understand that the significance of the items went far beyond their material value. John realized that she had not only curated these objects but had also sensed the emotional resonance they might hold for someone. Her patience and care in revealing the contents of the sack now made perfect sense. She had been guiding the moment with the understanding that history, when it resurfaces, should be handled with reverence. The auctioneer's voice broke the silence in a quiet but deliberate tone. These items are not just collectibles. They carry stories, memories, and legacies. Whoever acquires them is not only obtaining objects but inheriting a piece of history. His words echoed through the hall, but John felt they were meant for him alone. He could hardly focus on the other bidders, the paddles, or the potential price. All that mattered was the story unfolding before him, the medallion, and the realization that a lost part of his family history had returned. John's mind swirled with memories. He remembered the day the medallion had gone missing, how his grandfather had searched for it tirelessly, and how the family had eventually accepted its loss. He had grown up with a sense of something missing, a piece of history that had disappeared without explanation. Now, seeing it here, in Clara's careful hands, the years of longing and unanswered questions seemed to collapse into a single, astonishing moment of clarity. He noticed how delicately Clara handled each item, almost as if she could feel the weight of the past through her fingertips. The care she took with the letters, photographs, and medallion spoke to her understanding of the emotional significance embedded in these objects. John felt a deep gratitude for her role in bringing them to light, for protecting them, and finally presenting them in a way that honored their story. The room felt different now. The usual energy of an auction had shifted into something almost sacred. People were still present, watching, whispering, and speculating, but John was no longer aware of them. He was entirely absorbed in the medallion, the letters, and the photographs. It was as if time had slowed, allowing him to fully experience the weight of the moment, the history contained in each carefully preserved item, and the connection to his own family's past. John's hand hovered over the medallion, trembling slightly. He wanted to reach out, to hold it, but he hesitated. There was a sense of reverence here, a feeling that this moment was not just about reclaiming a lost object but about honoring the journey it had taken to return. Finally, with a deep breath, he lifted the medallion from the box. The weight in his hand was surprisingly comforting, and he could feel the texture of the worn carvings, the small imperfections that proved it had been touched, loved, and preserved through decades. As he held it, memories flooded him. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice telling the stories behind the medallion, the lessons of courage, loyalty, and perseverance that it symbolized. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. and he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the object itself, but for the people who had safeguarded it, for Clara, who had brought it here, and for the story that had survived despite the passage of time. Clara watched silently, a small smile playing on her lips. She seemed to understand that this was more than an auction transaction. It was the moment when a long-lost story had been reunited with its rightful owner, when history had found its way back home. The connection between John and the medallion was undeniable, a powerful reminder of the meaning that objects can carry when they are tied to memories, love, and legacy. The auctioneer, sensing the emotional intensity, lowered his voice. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are not the rarest or most valuable in monetary terms, but those that carry the stories of our lives, our families, and our histories. His words hung in the air like a quiet echo, reinforcing the significance of the moment. John could hardly nod, his attention fully consumed by the medallion, the letters, and the photographs. He began to examine the letters more closely, carefully reading each one. They described events that had shaped his family, the decisions made to protect certain items, and even the small, personal moments that had defined people long gone. Each word seemed to bring the past to life, bridging the gap between what had been lost and what was now found. John felt as though he was having a conversation with his ancestors, learning lessons they had tried to impart across generations. The photographs added even more depth. Faces smiled back at him from a distant time, frozen in moments of joy, sorrow, and everyday life. John could trace the connections between these strangers and his own family, feeling the lineage and continuity of life. He realized that the medallion, the letters, and the photographs were more than mere objects. They were vessels carrying human experience, emotion, and memory. As the auction continued around him, John remained absorbed in his discovery. Other people bid on other items, whispered, and speculated, but he barely noticed. The world had shrunk to the space around the wooden box, the medallion, and Clara's careful hands. Time felt suspended, each moment stretching to allow him to absorb the full significance of the story unfolding before him. Finally, John closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the magnitude of the moment sink in. He felt a profound sense of closure, a resolution to a mystery that had haunted his family for decades. The medallion had returned, not by chance, but through a journey of care, patience, and persistence. And in this small auction hall, surrounded by strangers, history had found its way back home, connecting past and present in a way that John would never forget. He opened his eyes and looked at Clara. Her calm, knowing smile reassured him that she understood the depth of what had just occurred. She had been the silent guardian, ensuring that these treasures found their way to the right person, preserving not just objects, but the stories and legacies they carried. John felt a surge of gratitude, realizing that he was witnessing something rare, a reunion with history itself, and a moment that would stay with him for the rest of his life. John carefully placed the medallion back into the velvet-lined wooden box. Even though he had held it, touched it, and felt its weight in his hands, he knew the box itself was more than just a container. It was part of the story, part of the journey that had protected these treasures for decades. Clara watched him quietly, as if she understood the emotions swirling within him. Her presence was calm, reassuring, and somehow grounding, like the steady heartbeat that matched the rhythm of the history unfolding around them. For a long moment, John simply stood there, taking in the letters, photographs, and medallion, feeling the connection to the past more deeply than he ever had. The crowd around them had returned to the usual murmur of conversation and quiet bidding, but John remained absorbed in a world that felt suspended in time. He realized that this was more than a rediscovery. It was a reunion with family, with history, and with a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. He looked at Clara, gratitude evident in his eyes. "I can't believe this is real," he said softly. "It feels like my family has been waiting for this moment all along." Clara smiled gently. "Sometimes, Treasures don't just find their way back by accident. They're meant to be discovered by the right person at the right time. Her words carried wisdom, simple, yet profound. John felt that in them, she had captured the essence of what had just occurred. This was not merely an auction. It had been a carefully guided journey, one that connected people to the objects they were destined to reclaim. The auctioneer, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, added, "Items like these are rare, not because of their material value, but because of the stories they carry. They are reminders that our history, our memories, and our legacies are precious and must be treated with respect." His voice, calm and measured, resonated through the room, but John felt as if it were speaking directly to him. John spent the next hour carefully examining the letters and photographs again. Each one offered a small window into the lives of those who had owned them before. One photograph showed a family gathered around a fireplace, laughter frozen on their faces. Another captured a young boy holding a medal, his expression proud and wide-eyed. John could almost hear the voices, smell the scents, and feel the emotions of the moments captured so many decades ago. The medallion, in particular, seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as if it had been waiting patiently for this reunion. He realized that the true value of the items lay not in rarity or potential financial gain, but in their ability to tell stories, preserve memories, and connect generations. The letters spoke of love, sacrifice, and daily life. The photographs captured fleeting moments of joy and hardship, and the medallions symbolized courage, loyalty, and family bonds. For John, it was like holding the heartbeat of history in his hands, feeling the lives of people long gone echo through the objects they had left behind. Clara observed John with quiet satisfaction. She had done more than present these items at an auction. She had orchestrated a reunion between the past and someone who could truly appreciate it. She had handled each item with care, guided the moment with patience, and now she could see that John was fully immersed in the significance of what he had discovered. She had seen many items change hands, but few had the same emotional resonance, the same ability to awaken a sense of connection and understanding in someone who had longed for answers. John's thoughts drifted back to his grandfather, who had told him stories about the medallion and the letters. He remembered the warmth of those evenings, the way his grandfather's eyes sparkled as he recounted tales of adventure, friendship, and family legacy. Holding the medallion now, John felt a deep sense of continuity, as if he were stepping into the footsteps of the past and carrying on a story that had been waiting for him to take up the thread. He decided to speak with Clara about the origins of the items. "How did you come to have all of this?" he asked. "I mean, how did these things survive for so long?" Clara paused thoughtfully before answering. "Some of it was preserved by families, some by collectors who recognized the importance of history. Others were hidden to protect them from being lost or forgotten. It took years to gather everything and ensure it was presented carefully. I think these items were waiting for the right moment and the right person to truly appreciate them." Her calm explanation only deepened John's respect for her. She had not only preserved history but had also understood its emotional resonance, making sure it reached someone who could truly connect with it. John felt a surge of inspiration. He realized that the items were not just memories, they were lessons, guiding him to honor the past while shaping the future. He thought about his own family, the stories he had heard, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. The experience had opened his eyes to the power of history, memory, and connection. He also felt a sense of responsibility. The medallion, letters, and photographs were not just artifacts. They were reminders of the lives that had come before him and the stories that needed to be preserved for future generations. He knew that it was now his duty to continue the chain, to ensure that these treasures remained safe, valued, and respected. It was a heavy responsibility, but one that filled him with purpose and determination. Clara smiled again, as if sensing the shift in John's mindset. "History is never just about the past," she said. "It lives in us, in what we remember, in what we do with the lessons we inherit. You have the chance to carry that forward, and I think you're ready." Her words resonated deeply with John. He felt a connection not only to his family's history but also to Clara, who had guided this extraordinary moment with quiet grace. As the auction continued around them, John made a decision. He would purchase the wooden box and its contents, not as an investment or a collectible, but as a means of preserving his family's legacy. He wanted the medallion, letters, and photographs to remain together, carefully protected and appreciated for their true significance. When he raised his paddle to place the bid, it was a symbolic act, a promise to honor the past while embracing the responsibility of stewardship. The auctioneer noticed the bid and nodded, acknowledging the significance of the moment. There were no other bidders competing aggressively for the items, and within moments, the gavel fell. John had won. The room erupted into polite applause, but for John, the applause felt secondary. The real victory was far more profound. The reunion with his family history, the reclaiming of lost treasures, and the deep connection he now felt to the past. Clara carefully handed the box to John, her hands steady and confident. "Take good care of it," she said softly. "These items have traveled a long way to reach you. Now it's your turn to honor their journey." John nodded, feeling the weight of her words, and carefully lifted the box, cradling it as if it were the most precious thing he had ever held. Outside the auction hall, the world seemed different. The air felt fresher, the light warmer, and the sense of possibility endless. John walked slowly, thinking about the stories contained within the box, the lives they represented, and the connection he now had to a past that had long seemed unreachable. Every step he took was accompanied by a quiet gratitude, a recognition of the journey that had led him to this moment. He knew that the medallion, letters, and photographs were not the end of the story, they were the beginning of a new chapter. He would preserve them, share their lessons, and ensure that the legacy they represented continued. He thought about future generations, imagining them discovering the letters, seeing the photographs, and holding the medallion. He hoped they would feel the same sense of wonder, connection, and inspiration that he felt now. John also reflected on Clara's role in this journey. Her careful guidance had allowed history to find its rightful place. She had not only presented the items, but had also facilitated a reunion that was deeply meaningful. He realized that she had a unique gift, the ability to connect people to the past in a way that was both respectful and transformative. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for her presence and guidance. As he reached his car, John carefully placed the wooden box on the passenger seat, feeling its weight and the responsibility it carried. He glanced back at the auction hall one last time, silently thanking Clara and everyone who had helped preserve these treasures. Then, with a deep breath, he started the engine and drove away. The box beside him, a tangible reminder that the past and present could coexist, guiding him toward a future shaped by the lessons and legacies of those who had come before. That evening, John sat in his study, carefully opening the box once more. He examined each letter, photograph, and the medallion, feeling the stories within them resonate in a way that was almost alive. He began to catalog each item, making notes about their significance, their history, and the connections they represented. As he worked, he felt a profound sense of purpose and fulfillment. He realized that the treasures were not just objects, they were a bridge, connecting him to his family, to history, and to the stories that would continue through him. For the first time in decades, the sense of something lost had been replaced by a feeling of completeness. John understood that history, memory, and legacy were not abstract concepts. They were alive, tangible, and waiting to be discovered, preserved, and honored. And in that realization, he found not only joy, but a renewed sense of connection to the people who had come before him, the objects that had survived their journeys, and the future he could now help shape.